Hello, debaters! Welcome to the Thailand Middle School Debating Championship 2023 Debaters Briefing. I'm John, I'm your host and convener for this tournament.
My name is Say, and I'm a Chief Educator alongside Bod and Ong for this tournament. The Chief Education panel are the people who make your motions and uphold the rules of this tournament to make sure it is fair and accessible for everyone.
So, let's get on with the briefing. So let's start with the tournament briefing. Here we'll be talking about how the tournament flow will be so that you know where you need to be and where you need to go throughout the tournament. Here's the schedule for TMDC 2023. On day 1, when you arrive at Point Avenue, you will check in and register. Then we will have some briefings to remind you of the rules and regulations and guidelines for this tournament. Then we will proceed to the first round of this tournament. After round 1, we'll have a lunch break and lunch will be provided for you. Then we have round 2, round 3, tea break, round 4, and that's the end of day 1. On day 2, when you arrive at Point Avenue, you will check in and register again, and we will have some briefing if necessary, if there are any information that needs to be updated or needs to be reminded of. Then we will have round 5. So this is the last preliminary round that everyone will be debating in. After round 5, we will proceed to lunch. Again, lunch will be provided for you. Then after lunch, we will have the break announcement. The break announcement is where we will announce the top teams that will be moving on into the knockout rounds. The first knockout rounds that will happen are the open quarterfinals. That is the quarterfinals for the open category. And for teams that have participants from grade 6 and 7 only, they can join the junior category and will break into the junior semifinals. Then the winners of those rounds will proceed to the open semifinals and the junior grand finals. After that, we will have a short tea break, the open grand finals where we will be able to watch the top teams of this tournament go head to head against each other. And after that, we will have the closing and award ceremony to crown the champions of TMDC 2023. This is the flow for each round during the tournament. First, we will announce the matchup for that round. This includes which side you will be on, either your proposition or opposition, which debate room you will be debating in, as well as who your adjudicator will be. Once everyone is clear on where they will be debating, who they will be debating up against, and which side they will be on, we will then proceed to announce the motion, which is the topic of the debate for that round. Once the motion is announced, you will be given some time to ask the adjudication core or the chief judges who will be in front of you during that motion announcement. You can ask them for any clarifications in case you do not understand the motion, or if there are any words that you are unsure about in the motion. You cannot ask other people from who are not your team members, for example, your teachers, your parents, or your other teams, even though you come from the same school or from the same group. So you can only ask the chief adjudicators or the adjudication core for clarifications on the topic. Once everything is clear, the debate will start. You will have 30 minutes to prepare for your debate after you get the motion. The proposition team will prepare inside of the debate room, and the opposition teams will prepare outside of the debate rooms. If there are any further instructions provided by the chair or the judge during the rounds of the debate, then you have to follow those instructions from your judges. After the debate ends, you've all given your amazing speeches. Then the judge will deliberate the results, call you back into the room, and provide you the result, and they will deliver an oral adjudication. An oral adjudication is basically telling you why the judge made that decision and probably some explanation on how you could have argued the debate better. Then we have the tabulation, or what we like to call the tab. So the tab is the system that creates the matchup, which means it is the system that determines who you go up against and which side that you are on. We are using a tabulation software called TabiCat, which is pretty standard for most tournaments and international tournaments all around the world. In this program, you will be provided the link to access your information and the results for your debate. And you will have the debate room, which side you're on, and after the debate, the result, whether you win or lose. You will not get the personal scores or the individual scores until after the tournament. So during the tournament, you don't know your individual scores. You only know your win and loss. But after the tournament, you can go back to that system and check for your personal scores to see how well did you do individually. So this is an example of what the tab would look like when you get the link and you click on it. You will have there on the left, you have the room. So that is the room number. And then you have the side, proposition, and opposition. You can see your team name there. Those are some examples from a previous tournament where you can see their team names and see which side they are on, and as well as the judges who will be judging that debate. All right, so now let's talk about the debate format. TMDC will be using an adjusted version of the World Schools Debating Championship format. So what does the format look like for TMDC? Each team will have 3 to 5 members. Although all of the members can prepare together, this means in preparation time, all 5 of you can be together, only 3 will be speaking each round. Think of it as the other 2 being substitute speakers. You can switch around your teammates. For example, let's say round 1, you have team member A, B, and C debating. But then in round 2, maybe team member A isn't feeling so confident. So you can switch them out and replace them with another team member. So maybe it will be team member B, C, and D who are debating instead because you have substituted your speakers. So each team, 5 members, but only 3 people will be speaking during a round. Each speech will be 6 minutes long with a 30-second grace period. What this means is that when you reach 6 minutes, there will be a double bell, ding, ding, indicating that you are out of time. You can finish your sentence, finish your thought, but if you go up to 6 minutes and 30 seconds, the judge will stop you. They will ask you to stop, and you will not be able to continue your speech after that time. For the reply speeches, it is 4-minute reply speeches, also with a 30-second grace period, which means maybe at 4 minutes, you still have another 2 or 3 words to say. You can still finish your sentence. You don't really have to stop immediately on time. But of course, if you do, then that's even better. That shows that you have great time management. We also have points of information, or POIs. Points of information are questions or interjections that you can ask while your opponent is speaking. So your opponent is giving their speech. Maybe you want to ask them a question, or maybe you want to point out a contradiction, or maybe you want to respond to what they are saying. You can raise your hand and wait for them to accept your point of information. If they accept your point of information, then you can proceed to ask your question. The preparation time, as mentioned earlier, is 30 minutes. So when you get the motion, then you have 30 minutes to prepare, and then the debate will start. All motions will be impromptu. This means that you will not get the motions before the tournament, but you will get the motions only 30 minutes before the debate. The language that we will be using for this tournament is English. That means that all the motions are in English, all the speeches are in English, and all of the feedback will also be in English. Great. Here we have the speaker order. This is how the flow will go during the debate. You have the Prime Minister or the first proposition speaker speak first for 60 minutes, followed by the Leader of Opposition. So that is the first member on the opposition team. Then followed by the Deputy Prime Minister, Deputy Leader of Opposition, Proposition Whip, and then Opposition Whip. All of these 6 speeches will be 6 minutes long, and as you can see, they go in sort of like a zigzag back and forth kind of motion. These are what we call the substantive speeches. Once these 6-minute speeches, the main 6 speeches are over, then we will go on into the reply speeches. A reply speech is sort of like a summary, and a bias adjudication is like your final chance to tell the judge why you deserve to win the debate based on the debate that happened. Each speech is 4 minutes long for the reply speeches. Reply speeches can only be done by the first or second speaker. This means that your whip speeches cannot give a reply speech. So an example of this would be maybe after the substantive speeches, the Prime Minister is giving the reply speech for proposition. And the deputy leader of opposition is giving the reply speech for opposition. So that's completely fine as long as it's not the whip speeches or the third speakers who are giving that reply speech. Great, so now let's talk about team speaker and roles. So here are some of the roles that are expected of you during the debate. In proposition, if you are supporting the motion, this means that you have to define the motion in a way that is clear and fair to both sides. You should present a characterization of what is the world that this motion takes place. What is going on in the world right now that we have to consider for us to have this debate. And where appropriate, you can provide solutions and arguments to those identified problems that you have mentioned in your speech. Then on opposition, you are opposing the motion. You are against the motion. You want to present your own version of the status quo and a characterization of what the world looks like. Maybe it's not as bad as the proposition says it is. Maybe the problem isn't something that really needs to be fixed, right? So and you can also have substantive arguments and a counter model. Maybe proposition proposes a solution, but you don't think that that's the best solution. In opposition, you can provide a counter solution or a counter model to say, hey, this is another way that we should do it instead, which is actually better. So that's the expectations for proposition and opposition. Proposition supports the motion. Opposition goes against the motion. Now for the speaker roles. For Prime Minister or proposition first speaker, so these are the first speakers on both sides. You will want to define the motion, provide the definitions for the keywords in the motion. You want to provide your case split. Who will be arguing what, right? In introduction of your team's arguments, maybe you can say, as the first speaker, I will be arguing this, and my second speaker will be providing these other arguments as well. And of course, you have to provide your arguments as to why you support the motion. Then as leader of opposition, right? The first opposition speaker, you also do a case split, introducing your team's arguments. You rebut, so you can respond and refute, say why your opponent was wrong, and as well as provide your own arguments as to why you do not support the motion. So those are the first speakers in each round. Then we have the second speakers or the deputies. So deputies, as they are the second speakers of the debate, they will rebut the first speaker. So your deputy prime minister will be rebutting the leader of opposition. And the deputy leader of opposition will be rebutting the prime minister and deputy prime minister. So you are responding to your opponent through rebuttals to attack your opponents. Then you will also provide responses, which are defending your own arguments or defending what your previous team member has said. You can also add on your own new arguments in order to further strengthen your case and galvanize your speech and your arguments that you are presenting from your side. The last speakers that we have in the substantive speeches are the whips. So we have the government whip and the opposition whip. They will rebut and respond to everything that has happened in the debate so far, attacking their opponents and defending their team members. Present the clashes. What are some issues that both sides were talking about, right? And on those issues, which side won those issues? So both sides may be talking about the same thing, the same issues, but different perspectives. So when you are presenting the clashes, you want to say why your perspective is the better one, why your solution is the better one, and why your arguments were the better ones in comparison to your opponents. You can also summarize your team's arguments and summarize the debate to provide a clearer picture to your judge of what has been going on in the debate so far. Lastly, we have, after the substantive speeches, we have the reply speeches. So reply speeches are like a biased adjudication. Here, you are telling the judge, hey judge, here's why my team wins this debate. My team argued A, B, C. This was not responded by our opponents. These arguments still stand, right? Or maybe my opponents argued X, Y, Z, and we have responded to all of those things. We've taken all of their arguments down. Therefore, we deserve to win this debate. An easy way to think about this is reply speeches. In reply speeches, you are not debating about the motion, but you are debating about the debate that happened and why your team should win that debate. Great. Now we have the point of information. There are some rules that we have for these point of informations, which are the interjections or questions that you will be asking during the debate. Point of informations, I've already explained what they are, but a rule here is that they can only be given after the first minute and before the 5th minute. What this means is, in a 6-minute speech, during that first minute, you cannot interrupt the speaker. You got to just let them speak. That's protected time. And as well as the last minute, right? So at the last minute of their speech, you also cannot interfere or interject with their speech. That's also protected time. But all the time in between, those 4 minutes in between, you feel free to ask questions that you want to ask, or feel free to stand up to ask questions. But you cannot immediately ask questions. You have to be accepted first by the speaker. So maybe it would look something like, oh, POI, please. And then the speaker will say, yes, your POI. And then you can ask your question. But if the speaker says, no, thank you, then you have to put your hand back down, and you just have to wait a little bit before you can ask or attempt to ask that question again. These POIs only happen during the substantive speeches, during the 6-minute speeches. During the reply speeches, those 4-minute speeches at the end, no reply speeches are allowed. So those entire 4 minutes are protected for both sides. So the speaker has the right to refuse POIs, right? So if you're speaking, someone's asking a question, you can say, no, thank you, as many times as you want. But it is recommended that you accept at least 2. Usually when you're accepting POIs, your answer can actually help you, or if you don't answer too well, it can hurt you. So that's up to you. What is your strategic decision on when and how you want to accept these POIs? If you do accept a POI, you have to allow that person to ask their question. There is a 15-minute time limit for the question, but your judge will stop that person asking the question if they're speaking for too long, so you don't have to worry about that. The judge will handle that for you. So let's say someone asks a POI, POI please, and then you go up and say, oh yes, I accept your POI. And then they ask the question, but the question goes on and on and on and on and on. Past 15 seconds, the judge will be like, order, too long, sit down. Right? And then if that happens, you don't have to answer the question. You can just carry on with your speech. Remember to always be polite and respectful when you are offering POIs or when you're accepting or rejecting those POIs. I know that in debates, you can get a bit excited. You can get a bit rowdy. You'll be like, oh, they said something wrong, and you want to stand up and you want to ask. But remember to keep calm, right? Hold your composure and remain polite even when you're asking questions that are attacking to your opponents.
Now, on to motions and what to do with them. A motion refers to the topic debated in the round and can be phrased in several ways, starting with this house. In some cases, unclear terms and a motion might be defined on an information slide by the adjudication court. So these are slides that are provided only when it's necessary, when there are terms that are too complex, and that debaters need more clarity and knowledge necessary for the debate to be functional. Any information on this slide would be assumed to be true for the purposes of the debate. If there is a word or words in the motion that are unclear to you on that day, you may ask the members of the adjudication court for clarification in the main hall. Just to be clear, the members of the adjudication court are myself, Pibot, and Ong. Here are some important notes. Number 1, you're not allowed to ask or discuss anything with anyone apart from the adjudication court or your teammates the moment the motions have been announced. If you're caught talking to your parents, your coaches, or anyone else besides your teammate in the adjudication court, you might be suspected of cheating and therefore be disqualified. Number 2, you're not allowed to use electronic devices throughout the tournament, for example, to take a picture of the motion, to search for information, and communicate with anyone as a whole. Your phones will be kept for you before the round starts. Lastly, you're not allowed to use any printed or prepared material throughout the entire duration of this tournament, as well as to prevent cheating. So, who exactly is this house and why does it appear in motions? Usually, the government or the state or a collective group of neutral actors would be considered as this house. This is just typical of a parliamentary tradition where we often know the parliament to be the House of Congress, House of Senate, etc. So an example of a motion would be, this house would ban smoking. Sometimes, a specific actor is defined in the motion, in which case, the action is being done by this actor, not an abstract state or society in general. So for example, this house believes that parents should have access to their children's social media accounts. The specific actors defined in these motions are the parents and the children. Next, let's talk about definitions. A fair definition of the motion should be offered by the first proposition speaker so that both teams have a common understanding of a debate. The first proposition speaker is expected to provide a fair and reasonable definition. So what does it mean for a definition to be reasonable? Let's look at this example. This house will allow people to sell their organs for money. A reasonable definition is general and intuitive. It is something that both sides wouldn't disagree too thoroughly about. It is a definition that allows for a fair debate to happen. So a fair definition in this motion would look like allowing people to receive compensation for a kidney, a portion of the liver, lungs, bone marrow, etc. So where donors wouldn't face life-threatening consequences, where they wouldn't be selling their lives just to earn money. There is therefore unreasonable for opposition to force proposition to defend a definition that requires them to allow donors to have their hearts and brains taken away where they can no longer live and function a normal life. It is also unreasonable for proposition to simply limit the debate to be just about blood donations, where they refuse to talk about the sale of organs or the removal of organ parts from human beings. Insofar as this is the case, both sides in both opposition and proposition's unreasonable examples prevent a fair debate from happening, prevent clashes from appearing in the debate, and therefore don't allow for a good substantial debate to happen. Finally, let us talk about the scoring criteria. For this tournament, we will be using the scoring range from the World Schools Debating Championship format, which ranges from 60 to 80. I will go into more detail, but please keep in mind to not ask your adjudicators for your scores throughout the entirety of this tournament. Your scores will only be published officially at the end of the tournament. Let us look at what it means to get a 60. The 60 is the lowest score possible for this tournament. It means that your content have largely not been relevant to the motion and what the team needs to prove. All the points that were given were claims with no analysis and are generally confusing to follow. Because the speeches were hard to follow, it was difficult for the adjudicators to give any credit. What is then 61 to 63? It means that some of the claims made by the speakers and the team as a whole are marginally relevant to what the motion required. However, insufficient analysis was provided in the claims and mainly were lines without explanation. Parts of the speech might have been clear, but significant parts important to the debate was too hard to follow. Next, 64 to 66. To get a score along this range means that some of the points you made were relevant to the debate. The arguments and rebuttals were made with some levels of explanation and analysis, but there were significant logical gaps in the explanation. The speech therefore sometimes becomes difficult to follow logically. Next, 67 to 69. So here is where most of the points made are relevant to the debate. All arguments and rebuttals have some levels of explanation, but are still largely insufficient in terms of logical and analytical requirements, where the arguments needed to be proven or needed to have more evidence. Generally, the speech were easy to follow, but some sections may have been difficult to understand. Next, let's talk about 70. 70 is the average speaker score for this tournament and for World Schools format as a whole. To get a 17 means that there were no major shortfalls in your speeches, nor were there any strong moments. The arguments were almost exclusively relevant, although they may fail to address one or more core issues sufficiently enough to impact the debate as much as it should. All arguments have sufficient explanation without major logical gaps and some examples, although they are still simplistic and easy to attack. The 70 speeches are generally easy to follow throughout, which makes the speech understandable, although the style does not necessarily serve to make the speech more persuasive. Next, what is this above average speech then? An above average speech would range along 71 to 72. It means all your arguments were relevant and address the core issues of the debate, that they were significant enough to affect the judging and the weighing of the adjudicator. All arguments have sufficient explanation without major logical gaps, and most of them have credible amounts of examples. Some points raised by the team may have minor logical gaps or deficits in explanation, but largely they were not that significant. Lastly, the speech is probably easy to follow throughout, and on occasion, stylistic devices may have been given to serve more engagement and more persuasion throughout the delivery itself. Now, moving on, this is where speeches become exceptional, and these are the highest scores that you would see in most World Schools tournaments. So these are the 73 to 76 range. This is the 73 to 76 range. So in this range, your arguments are not only relevant, but they're very engaging on the most important issues. Not only do your arguments have sufficient explanation, they don't have any major logical gaps that puts your team in a strategic disadvantage. Occasionally, the speaker even provides more sophisticated and nuanced analysis, extending from what had been said before from both teams, and this makes their arguments even harder to attack. Not only are these speakers easy to follow, they are on occasion very stylistic and therefore very engaging and persuasive in pushing their case across. Now, onto the range that is extremely difficult to achieve for most speakers, 77 to 79 and lastly 80. So to get a 77 to 79, your arguments have to be all relevant and very well illustrated. You have to address the core issues of the debate with thorough explanations. There should be no logical gaps. You should have very credible examples, and you should be making your case very difficult to attack, which displays your skills in strategic thinking. Your speech would be easy to follow throughout, and your style would be very effective in making the content very engaging, perhaps even relevant, and to some extent inspirational. Lastly, 80, possibly one of the best debating speeches ever given in the World Schools competition. It is incredibly difficult to think up of satisfactory responses to any of the arguments made by the speaker, and these arguments are generally considered to be flawless, compelling, and made with outstanding delivery to the extent that you could perhaps change a person's point of view at the end of your speech. So this is what it means to be 80. These are very, very rare speeches, but these are definitely ideals you should strive towards. Let's talk about scoring reply speeches. So reply speeches are generally scored as half of what you would get for a substantive speech. So for example, if your reply speech was a quality of about a 70 in a substantive speech, it will be scored as 35. The reason for that is because within the format, reply speeches are generally half the time of the substantive speech. So here is the ranges for what a reply speech would look like. If the reply speech was a 30, it means that the speaker did not describe the debate as it happened. The speaker may have misunderstood or misrepresented central arguments and responses. If the reply speech was scored at 31 to 34, it means that instead of actually identifying or analyzing points of clash, the speaker mostly relied on retelling the debate as it happened or attempted to continue arguing for their side. Keep in mind, you're not supposed to bring in new arguments or new material in reply speeches, and generally, adjudicators would not credit it even if you did. Next, 35. This would be the average score for reply speeches. Speaker identified the main points of clash between two teams and was able to provide some basic justification for why the adjudicator should award the win to the speaker's team. Next, above average, 36 to 39. This means that there was an almost perfect overview of the debate, and particular interactions from the debate were well analyzed and used as evidence to justify to the judge why they should award the win to the speaker's team. Lastly, 40. This means the speaker flawlessly analyzed the debate that had just occurred. The speaker was able to accurately identify turning points in the debate, including all the strongest arguments and rebuttals of their opponents, and clearly show why their side should win on a balance. In other words, they're helping the judge do all the important weighing and helping them reach the best justification possible. So that concludes our debater's briefing. Once again, my name is Say.
And I'm John.
Best of luck!